yeah, there are still, even my little neighborhood has a March of Solidarity later this morning too. So.
Yeah, Becca and Mike, as well as our son JB and people lived on his block, they had a real campaign going of collecting items to take down to the areas where the stores were all torched, and they were bringing diapers and formula and food, and there was quite a caravan going round and round for that last week to get much needed supplies down there.
Right.
So
Okay, I'd like to get started this morning. Thank you all for attending. Ian, always good to see you. We're glad you're here this morning, and Becca as well. I'd like to start with a short devotion with some thoughts that I extracted from the ELCA Global Mission website and added some thoughts of my own. Mission rooted in relationship means mutuality, inclusivity, vulnerability, sustainability, and empowerment. Mostly it means growth for everyone involved. Together we listen, learn, and deepen our understanding of one another. As we recognize and affirm one another's gifts, we become invested. These investments are the center of Global Mission. The ELCA has organized its global engagement around theology and the practice of accompaniment, walking together with Lutherans, but many others as well, ecumenical and interfaith sisters and brothers from around the world. We are a church that believes God is calling us into the world together. A lot of mission work historically looked like this. There is God's story, my story, and your story. Mission meant me bringing God's story to you. God's story is on my side, and you are on the other side. I'm crossing boundaries to bring God to you. Of course, this has it completely wrong and backwards. God's grace is never unidirectional. It flows in many directions simultaneously. Although we provide support to many partners, it's not just about monetary support. By being open, inclusive, and vulnerable, we are caring and being cared for by those with whom we engage. Thanks be to God. A word of prayer. God of creation, all people are created in your image. We are amazed and thankful for the variety of races and cultures in the world. We pray for your presence with us and those we serve in countries near and far. Help us to recognize and overcome any bias we have to serving you alongside our partners. Be our guide as we plan activities for the next several months, for it is only by your grace that we live and serve. In Christ we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I'd like to turn it over to Rebecca and Ian now, and we've allocated a full hour here, so it's all yours. You should be able to grab the screen, Ian, whenever you want to.
Okay. Well, I'm going to share screen now. Can you see that, everyone? No, not yet.
Not yet.
Okay, I think that's it.
There we are.
Well, Becca, I think maybe we should start by, I'm actually going to unshare this for a moment, and because we know how to get back on. Becca, why don't you kick off? Because I have some sort of general thoughts, and I think we need to put this partnership into this work in Uganda into a context. And I do think, you know, Jim's point just now, we need to think beyond the sort of current debate on race in this country, and we need to think more generally about relationships and the power. And I don't know about you all, but I'm sure this is the case, but I mean, this sort of last 2 weeks coming after this 3 months of lockdown and has really been has caused a lot of soul searching for me personally and in our little group. And I don't think our attitudes will ever be the same again, and hopefully that will be a good thing. But why don't you kick off, Rebecca? Tell us where you think this discussion fits in, and then I'll pick up from that, and then we can get, you know, we can take a deeper dive into the Uganda project.
Sure. Do you mean where it fits in within the
Yeah.
Prince of Peace Global Missions, or?
Well, I mean, you went out to Uganda for us as a volunteer
Yeah.
in 2012.
So sort of the recap from there.
It's 8 years on, and which is sort of an amazing thought. We're 8 years older. You don't look it. I certainly do. And sort of think about where we are with this project, and just link it to some of the comments that Jim just made. I think let's try and do that together.
Sure. So,
Rebecca,
yeah.
can I just interrupt real quickly? We have a couple new folks, Pastor Wilson, Jim Schaefer, who were not involved in a couple weeks ago, or a couple years ago when you two were here. I just thought maybe they'd want to introduce themselves. Pastor Jim and Jim Schaefer, I think you're brand new to this, just so you.
Sure, quick introduction's appropriate.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Mind my manners here.
No.
Jim Schaefer, why don't you introduce yourself, and then Pastor Jim.
Yeah, I want to introduce myself to Becca Sherpels. My name is Jim Schaefer. I don't know if you ever met me before, but no, I'm a member of the church and just got involved with Global Missions, was working with some people with our Amparo project, and I thought this matched real well, and great group and does great things, and teacher in the district, and see a lot of kids coming from a lot of different places, and just looking for different ways to help out.
Teacher in the district who I had now maybe 20 years ago. Is that, are we there?
I've only been teaching for like 4 years, so I don't know how that's possible.
Yeah.
So must be another Jim Schaefer that you had, some young, spry person that had hopes and dreams. That person's been replaced.
Okay. Then Pastor Wilson.
Oh, Rebecca, Jim Wilson, filling in as an interim associate for Pastor John while Prince of Peace goes through the call process. So
Wonderful.
good to be part of that. My interests at Global Missions have been El Salvador and Haiti and Palestine. So, but
Excellent.
this is wonderful for me.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I guess if we turn the dial back a little bit, almost a decade now, it was 2011 when I went out to Gulu, Uganda, in the northern part of the country with the Advocacy Project, of which Ian's the director, and spent 3 months there. It was during that time that projects were focused on a couple different things, but one of the observations was the inaccessibility for water and sanitation, specifically toilets in the city, and that the office where I was working was the only spot in the city with an accessible toilet, meaning people in town who used a wheelchair, had other accessibility needs, would either need to leave their work and come wheel themselves to our office, which could be up to an hour round trip process, and the loss of that productivity, or it would mean going to the bus park and literally crawling on hands and knees through public latrines, which is certainly a cry for hygiene, but also dignity. And this notion of when communities at the very entry point aren't accessible for the most basic of needs, how do we start talking about access to education and employment and healthcare and everything that comes with access and equity? And so that sort of kicked off Ian's and Advocacy Project's ongoing effort in the last 8 years since, to hone in on the WASH, so water sanitation and hygiene projects in the north, with a key need to connect that the organization who's in charge of it with the community members and what their needs are, and then ultimately with the hope that it would be taken on by the government, that the government sees that this is a more than an investment in the infrastructure, but an investment in their communities. And so focusing on schools specifically, and we'll hear that from Ian shortly, providing accessible toilets and latrines to schools in the area. That being, I think that was strategic for several reasons, and Ian, you can certainly elaborate on this, but I think one, it gives you a specific spot to go to, right? There are structures and places, and you can start kind of checking off the schools and doing accessibility sort of tallies on where they are with their accessibility. But then also again, it's that access. And if kids can't go to school and have a safe and hygienic place to go to the bathroom, they'll stop going to school, right? And we can only imagine the domino effects that come from there when you're denied education. I think that's even more in place for kids with disabilities, right? So students who may be ostracized in other ways. And then also for girls and girls with disabilities when they reach the age of menstruation, and that safety and need for a safe place for going to the bathroom, right, is denied. So in the context of, again, that was where it was 8 years ago. We can hear from Ian on the update, but as it connects to this notion of mission, Jim, I really appreciate that devotion this morning in terms of faith and giving and perspective not being unidirectional, but that it is in collaboration. And I truly appreciate the role that, or the approach that the advocacy projects takes with their community partners, in that it's not coming in with a prescription on how to get things done, but it is being ingrained with the communities long-term, knowing the needs from the inside out, rather than me assuming, as you know, Becca from Dublin, Ohio, that I know what those needs are. So, and that's where it puts us in a place of using our platforms, right? The community that you all have built, you know, at the church, with the Global Missions, with Closet Cause, and where that leads us to really, I mean, we've heard this term used a lot lately, but using our platform of privilege, right? And that comes with financial resources and access, and sort of a call to reallocate how those resources are shared in this world. So we see the need locally, and we see the need internationally. And I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to listening to the communities affected most, whether that's children needing access to a toilet in northern Uganda, or communities of color in our own neighborhoods. And so, yeah, it's an interesting sort of convergence of these themes, but I think, you know, the efforts of the last, I don't recall how long Closet Cause has been in play here, but
20 years or so.
20 years, yeah. The just the role that plays to get the congregation involved. And I understand it's going to look a little bit differently this year. 2020 being, I heard somebody say that whatever you said in 2015 about where do you see yourself in 5 years, we were all wrong, right? We all got it wrong. And so I think early on in 2020, and even with the last couple of weeks in terms of cries for racial equity being even louder in this country, it could be easy to say, oh, just get rid of 2020. I just want to cancel it, and I'm ready to move on and forget all about it. But I think there's a different fire burning now for using this year and really seeing some transformative perspectives, not only from coronavirus and how we support one another as a community, whether that means not seeing each other in person for 3 months and, you know, worshiping from home. And I've watched, you know, a couple of the Prince of Peace Sunday mornings, and it's different. It's still worship, right? And so finding ways to support one another in distance, but then also, you know, these last few weeks again of how we're listening to communities and our own sort of personal reckoning with perspectives and biases. So I think this will be a year for individual and collective community to, to really push forward. And, you know, coronavirus is something that it's been a universal crisis here, and, you know, Uganda has also been affected. Their numbers are fortunately very low, which is good. Of course, that's good. But, you know, there's still need to be on top of it. And then looking at, you know, the international cry for justice that really is happening in countries, you know, all over the place. It's just a really interesting confluence of messages there. So I will leave it there and pass it over to Ian. But yeah, thank you to Prince of Peace team for ongoing support of the Advocacy Project and GDPU in Gulu, and for just creativity and adapting to the needs of this year. And I know it's going to, a fewer bins and dressers and bins of toys, and it's going to look a little different this year. But yeah, just grateful for the generosity and ongoing willingness to learn from one another. So thank you.
Thanks, Becca. Well, I have very fond memories of having a beer with Becca back in, I thought it was 2012, but apparently 2011 in Kampala, before she went north to Gulu to work with this organization, the Gulu Displaced Disabled Persons Union. And I also have very fond memories of coming and staying with Ken and Martha, and then going down to the church and spending a whole day talking to successive congregations about exactly the same thing, which was toilets in the worst possible shape, and thinking, how many more ways can we describe this? But your pastor was very tolerant, so it was a wonderful visit to see you all. So I just want to put this into a little bit of context. And the first point is that your mission, a global mission, is really important, not just because of what Becca and Jim were saying earlier. We're all more aware of the need for social justice, but also because it's so difficult. I mean, this pandemic has kind of destroyed so many different initiatives, international initiatives and relationships. And we've had to rethink this work from scratch. And in a moment, I'll talk a little bit about where our WASH program is, the one that Becca launched, but also more generally about how this organization, the GDPU, has responded, which I think is interesting. The second point I'd make is that, and I think this is very interesting, at the moment, the entire discussion is focused on the problems of racism and the challenge and the bad stuff. There's nothing, I have read nothing about the reaffirming power of multiculturalism and diversity, and how enormously fulfilling it is to feel that you're bridging that gap. It doesn't matter what the gap is. I mean, Patrick Ojok, who heads the organization that Becca and I have both worked with in Uganda, has become a very close friend of mine, and of Becca's as well. And when I passed at the tender age of, well, I'm not going to tell you how old it was, but let's say it was a significant milestone in my own life. Patrick sent me a video, which I was able to show to my family, which was very sweet, really, and it sort of acknowledged 10 years of partnership and friendship. I think that positive side of multiculturalism is, in many respects, the best reply to racism, and I think we need more focus on that. Now, the third thing I think which is very interesting is that our program this summer, as I said, like so many international programs, has been savaged by the pandemic. I mean, we are not sending any Peace Fellows out. All of our partners are under lockdown, and that's particularly difficult in Africa. So, our international activities and our international focus have been put on hold. It's like frozen in aspic. And so we've had to adjust and respond to that like everybody else, but keep the flame burning, as it were. We have 3 Peace Fellows this year who are working remotely, and one of them is working with the GDPU, and he is legally blind. He's 100% blind. He's a very remarkable man who was born in Haiti, and it's just a huge success story. He went on to work for Apple. He's studying at Georgetown University. I mean, he's a very accomplished guy, and he was determined to get down to Uganda to work with Patrick and his team and sort of help them see, expand their strategy, if you like, for dealing with disability in Uganda. Very sad that he couldn't do it, but he's stayed on, and he's very much a part of the team. So Patrick, his name is Wilson, and I are helping Patrick to sort of deal with this crisis and figure out where we go. So let me just explain a little bit about GDPU, particularly for James and Jim. GDPU is an organization that advocates for people with disability in Gulu, which is a northern town in Uganda, very close to the Sudanese border, has one of the largest refugee populations in the world coming in from Sudan. They've been around for a long time. They were created during the Lord's Resistance Army to make sure that humanitarian aid got to people with disability. And Patrick, the director, he's effectively the director, is our sort of partner. The project that you have funded, that the mission has funded, as Becca said, installs toilets and water into primary schools in the Gulu area. And we've done, I think, a remarkably good job. Well, not we, but GDPU. We've re-equipped 4 schools, well over 3,000 students. And the model itself, as we'll come on to in a few minutes, I think is a very progressive one. The overall cost has been very modest. I would say $35,000 in total, of which your donations have been extremely important. But with the schools closed in Uganda for the time being, that WASH project has been put on hold. Now, Uganda's beginning to open, like the rest of the world, very cautiously. So I'm thinking and expecting that WASH program will come back on stream, probably not until the fall, but certainly this year. In the meantime, I think the way that the GDPU has reacted is really, really interesting. You know, as Becca said, Africa so far has really not been hit hard by COVID, with some exceptions. Kenya is probably one of the worst, next door to Uganda, and nobody quite knows why this is, except that they got onto the lockdown idea very, very quickly, and they've applied it ferociously. I mean, we've heard from Zimbabwe that soldiers are going through the slum areas, beating people up if they see them outside their homes and fining them $20 if they're not wearing a mask, and packing people off to jail. They're not bringing in emergency food. So there's a lot of kind of starvation, for want of a better word, in those slum areas in Zimbabwe. So the rate of infection is very low. But again, you know, they only have 4 ICUs in the country. And they were only able to test 180 people in the first month. So we don't know whether the figures are realistic or not, because their testing capacity is very, very limited. But what we do know is that this has created an enormous amount of problem and pressure on people who are poor and people with disability and the marginalized communities in these countries. And the people with disability in Gulu, where Becca worked, are among the most, have been among the hardest hit in Gulu, because they can't move. There's a lockdown and they can't get out. So whatever chance there is of getting to the market, they can't take advantage of that. And that is really, you know, many of them who work in the informal sector. So they'll move into the sort of surrounding neighborhoods of a town. And that came to a grinding halt. And so we were looking around for ways to help them. We realized that we found that there was a small group of tailors with disability led by a splendid tailor called Mama Cave. I'm just going to see if I can share the screen here and show you. I brought up this. Let's see if I can bring this up here. Okay. Here's a picture. Can you see that? Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we got it.
Yes.
So this is Mama Cave here, who's really, you know, got a serious disability. She's also a very good tailor. And so she's formed a little group of 3 or 4 people, other tailors, and they've been making face masks. Now, initially, it didn't seem very promising because the Chinese and the Indians were importing lots of face masks and sort of swamping the local market. And there wasn't much of a push for face masks. Well, that's turned completely around. The local people were very scared that the Chinese masks would carry the virus, so they weren't buying the imported stuff. The government hasn't been able to fill the gap. And all of a sudden, there's an enormous demand for face masks, particularly as life sort of reopens and public transport is going to get back underway. So what we did was we put out a bulletin and a little appeal, and we actually raised about $2,000, which we've been giving to 10 different partners around the world in 250, 300 at a time, investing in initiatives like Mama Caves in Uganda. And it's gone extremely well. I mean, we're focusing on face masks first and foremost, and then secondly on soap, and both of those are going to be needed for the foreseeable future in all of these countries. And it so happens that Mama Caves mask making has developed into a real little business. I mean, they're getting contracts from NGOs. They've branded their masks, they're calling them Mama masks, and they're kind of branding them with a little brand on the mask itself. And now we hear that GDP also has some members who make soap as well. So they're going to start a training program, a soap making program for GDPU members. And Wilson, our Peace Fellow, who has experience of marketing, is helping Patrick to put that program together. And then we're hoping very much, we've spent quite a lot of our own money on this project. We've distributed well over $2,000 to these various partners. But the goal in every case is to invest a small amount of money in an initiative which comes from the partner and has a lot of support among the local stakeholders, which encourages them to learn skills like making masks, making soap, whatever, gives them an opportunity to kind of work together as a community, even if they're working remotely, and opens up the possibility of earning some money, which can hopefully evolve into a sustained microenterprise, for want of a better word. And it does seem to be working quite well. We're working in Mali, in Uganda, in Kenya, in Zimbabwe, in Nepal, and also in Palestine. And in each case, you see people coming together, sort of, seizing the opportunity to work together as groups of people, learning a skill and positioning themselves for what happens after the pandemic ends. And what I think we've got here, Becca in particular, is we have a new model of aid, international aid, which actually is a lot more constructive than most of the conventional aid that just throws millions of dollars at Western NGOs and expects them, eventually that money will sort of reach somebody. So I'm hopeful that, as with so much about this pandemic, that the response of these partners is going to open the way to something different and longer term, and maybe even get people to rethink how important it is to invest in communities as opposed to investing in large Western organizations, which I think has always been a major problem of aid. So that's the context. Now let's get to our WASH program, which the mission has. Yes.
I'm very sorry to interrupt. Can I just add one quick thing to that? I think another an element that really can't be overstated with that notion of mama masks and these groups that are providing is that when they are the ones selling and out in front of folks providing this essential service, it also starts to shift the social perspective of what the disability community is within that social fabric, right? So if you're often seen as the recipients of service, we're flipping the script here, right? And that folks with disabilities are the ones out front providing that need and starting to show the intrinsic value that they've always had, but hasn't always been awarded to them or, given or shared with them, to say, no, these are essential members of our community. They are contributing. We need them, right? It also starts to change that perspective, which I think can't be overstated
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah, no, that's an enormously important point. I mean, until 3 months ago, you know, Mama Kay was kind of looked down on. People would go to her little stall by the side of the road, and she was a person with disability. Okay, well, we'll go to her when we need our shoes mended or our clothes mended. I mean, now she's kind of a superstar. You know, she's recognized, and talk about empowering. I mean, what could be more empowering than that? So let's get on to the WASH program, because this is still the heart and soul of our work with GDPU, and it's what the mission funded last year. And I think the first thing to say is that it's gone extremely well. I mean, this is far and away the most successful project that we support at the moment. And the reason is because we've used toilets as a point of entry. And I did make this point, and Becca made this point a couple of years ago, quite forcefully, is that it started out as being aimed exclusively at school children with disability, because they were being discouraged from going to school by the fact that there were no proper facilities for them at the schools. And, you know, if you live 2 or 3 miles away from the local school, and it's a struggle for you to get there anyway, you have a wheelchair, you have crutches, whatever it might be, and you get there and you can't even perform your basic bodily functions, you have to go into the field. Well, you're going to choose the field, you know, which is back home. And so people didn't go, people were dropping out of school. So when we started, the first school was focused exclusively on children with disability. And so we, you know, built a new toilet, put in a ramp and all of the hand grab bars and all the rest of it. But we realized after about a year that this toilet was also being used by other students, and that the other facilities for the other students were also completely inadequate. And in the past 4 years, this project has expanded from focusing exclusively on kids with disability to focusing on the entire school population. Because the dropout rates in these schools, and we'll show you a little video in a moment, the dropout rate in these schools is horrific. I mean, you have a school of 500 kids and they're losing like 100 kids a year. And we kept hearing one of the reasons was because the toilets were so bad. So we installed the toilets, and then we realized if you install the toilets, you have to put in water, because there's no point in having a toilet and not having water that you use to wash your hands. And if you put in water, you have to have soap. And if you put in a toilet, you have to clean the toilet. So every year we learn from our, not mistakes, but we learn from the experience. And every year we can see this model beginning to expand and become richer. And we had taken it to the point this year where we were going to include, or rather not just focus, but include water as a major priority in this program. It's not just about toilets. And, you know, even if you're supplying tanks for washing your hands, which is a part of the sort of the package, if you like. So you install 3 or 4 toilets in a stand, in a group. You put in a water tank, which you can use for washing your hands, the kids can use. And the water is supplied by a gutter, which comes down, and basically the tank is filled with rainwater. Well, that's fine, but what happens in the dry season? You know, they have to lug the water from the other side of the school compound, from the borehole. And what we were finding was that, you know, in the case of the Abacus school, which is where we worked last year, that the borehole was broken. So they weren't pulling the water, and the water wasn't getting up in the dry season. And it meant that the kids couldn't wash their hands. So one of the core points about installing a toilet, which is to improve hygiene, was actually kind of hampered by that. So this year, when we planned to go into the school, which you'll see in a moment, we hoped to introduce, to improve the water supply. And the way we were going to do that was to create a little committee of parents whose job it was to look after the water borehole, make sure it was maintained. And this is another huge takeaway from this project, which is that if the parents are not engaged, then the school will get vandalized, the toilets will get broken, the gutters will get stolen, the windows will get smashed. But if the parents are involved, they have some skin in the game, and they're the best guarantee that the facilities won't get vandalized. And we have engaged them by asking them to dig the latrine pit. They don't charge money for it, but they put the work in. And having dug the pit, you know, they make damn sure that it is looked after, that the toilet itself is looked after. So I think what we might do now, this film is not very long. Have any of you seen it? Any of you looked at it? I sent the link to Jim and to Ken, I think. Unmute.
Ian, I just saw the.
I'm sorry. I stopped. Go ahead, Jim.
I just saw the newsletter. I haven't seen the video.
Oh, okay, good. All right. Well, let's take a look at this, because I guess I'm partly here with Rebecca to report back on how this program has evolved. And I would say it's a stellar program up to this point, but also to explain how we're going to go forward. And if we're lucky enough to get another grant from the mission, then how that money would be spent. So I'm going to go back on to share screen now. I must say the Zoom technology is kind of amazing.
Ian, just checking, did
Yes.
you share it with the audio included?
I'm not sure that I did, Becca.
If you wouldn't mind, end your share screen and then
Yep.
click it again, and there should be a checkbox in the bottom left-hand corner that says include audio.
Oh, share computer sound, is that what
Yes,
we want?
yeah.
Okay. Optimize screen sharing for video clip, why not?
Go for it.
Let's go for it. All right, let's see if that works. And let's bring up this little film, and then we can maybe talk a little bit about it afterwards. I need to get back into this underneath here. All right. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
Cool.
Ian, is there audio yet? I'm not getting.
No, I don't think there is actually.
Okay, cool.
This former construction was filled up, and now the roof was blown off. So we have decided to leave it like this, not to be used because it is risky for the life of our children in school. But when you see this building here left, still it puts the life of our children at risk, because in case they come and play around, they can be hurt, they can even fall in the pit. So we feel like this building should be demolished. You have stepped on the feces because the latrine is filled up. So some girls, they fear now to enter, and they decide to just leave the defecation outside, which is very risky. You're supposed to talk. How are you going to use it?
Do they have toilet paper?
Do you have toilet paper with you? So there's no toilet paper. They'll use this ordinary paper after plucking from the book, in the middle of the exercise book.
They take the paper out of an exercise book?
Yes, they don't have toilet paper. Yeah, this construction was done and handed over to us as the school, but we have not yet started using it because the parents did not provide the toilet paper. And this latrine here does not use any other paper apart from toilet paper. Because when they use the ordinary paper, we fear the children can even throw stones, and when you want to drain it, it becomes a problem.
What conclusion do you draw from that about the parents? Are they engaged in the life of the school, the parents here?
Yeah, parents, we have called for a meeting, and the meeting is on the 7th of this month. They are coming so that we agree to open the latrine and we begin using it. When they will come for the meeting, they will carry along the toilet paper for their children.
What about this water tank here? What is this used for?
This one is used for washing the hands after visiting the latrine.
Is it working?
It is not working. It is now spoiled.
Why?
It was built but not done properly because disabled children cannot access this.
Because it's too high for them to reach.
It is too high for them, so they came, they wanted to wash, and then the tap got broken.
So what is this room used for, Evelyn?
It is used as changing room for girls when they're for their menstruation.
It's not very big or comfortable, is it?
It is very small and it is unhygienic, so girls don't feel comfortable when they're using this room because their friends will be passing to go and eat themselves, and they fear to be seen by colleagues.
So Evelyn, tell me a little bit about this.
Yeah, this one's here, the latrines for girls. It is pit. It is now filled up, used by 283 girls. And when you looked at the building, it is really not healthy for the children. And this one, when we continue using it, it leads to dropout. You know, girls are delicate. And if they're not treated well in school, they can drop out, then they can involve themselves in early marriages, which is not really good. So as Uganda, we expect that girls would study and they could also have good position in future when they grow up. And you know, when you educate one girl, it means you would have educated the whole nation. So our emphasis is girls would be helped so that they complete their studies.
And you think that the poor state of these toilets is forcing girls to drop out?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying if we keep on using this one, they can drop out.
Okay. And we pick up better on top of the mirror.
We have to clean it.
Clean it, well, better. Well, better.
And then after putting it, it tastes like even I told the contractor, these things are not that red. Oh yeah, but it's not finished.
Even P1 is poorly constructed, and the tanks will not just be on top like this because it will be accessible to vandalism. And these water tanks will be fitted inside so that it is stuck in, and the tap comes out of here, like we are doing in all the places. And by the way, the gutter, the pipe for the gutter should not enter through this point. But we have a different point where the gutter is fixed, and the pipe is too long. This is also very dangerous, especially for blowing wind. The wind can easily blow it off. Even community who know the use of this pipe can easily steal it because it is far from the school compound. And therefore, my recommendation is that all these structures will be changed if we want our children to use. Otherwise, it will never be used. That's the reason why it has been vandalized, because no child can access this unless you are an adult. So when they come here, they will force the tap to open, or they will just climb up, and therefore will automatically destroy this. Absolutely, this would be a good fifth project to take on because the population of the school is high and currently toilets that are functional is not there. So we really need to put up a toilet here, at least 5 stands, and girls' changing room.
And a girls' changing room.
Yes.
When you see these girls, we've just seen them, they've gone into the toilet. It's in horrible condition. How do you feel?
I really feel very sorry for the children, for the girls who are using this facility because it's very dangerous for their health and even for their life. A toilet that is filled up doesn't need to be used. In any case, if a health inspector comes here and find the children using this facility, they could easily close. Actually, if this was a private school, it would have been closed. The reason why it is still functional is because it's government-aided school.
Well, let me ask Evelyn again, how do you feel about the fact that you can't provide your students with proper sanitation facilities?
Yeah, at first I feel bad when I, as the aid teacher, fail to provide good facility to the children. I know one cannot do the work. As an aid teacher, my work is now to lobby so that the school gets what should be given for the children.
And would you like to work with the GDPU and with us maybe in America to get support for the school?
I do.
Do you think the parents will be with you in this?
They will be very willing to work with you and as the school.
Okay. Well, there we go. Well, did you get that okay?
You know, I look at that, you know, watching that clip again and just thinking, it's not a matter of feeling sorry for the people in Uganda. It's a matter of looking at it and saying, I can write a check right now to make this happen. You know, I can do something right now to help them. And Evelyn's point is well taken that you've got to educate these girls so they become, you know, part of society, that they don't just run off and get married when they're 12 years old. You know, I thought that was a really interesting point of keeping the girls there to get them educated. And again, it seems if this is the solution to that, you know, bathrooms, hell, let's build 10 a year. You know, it seems that we can do this and have such an impact. I'm ready to do it again. It's just really great.
To that point about, you know, girls being, you educate the world, study after study shows that when girls are educated, as they become parents, the ripple effect for their own families and then the community is astronomical. So not only education possibly leading to employment, but also nutrition for their children, understanding, you know, what it means to have health implications for their kids, the need to go to the doctor. It means possibly, you know, a different power dynamic in marriages in terms of access to resources, and that it's not just the husband who controls finances, but that it's spent on education. It's, you know, so there's this incredible ripple effect, you know, in studies in Uganda, but also from all over the world, that access to girls' education is statistically better for the community. So it just ripple effect is incredible.
Right. I mean, one of the good things about this program is that we know exactly where every single dollar is spent. I mean, there's just no wastage. There's no, it's not going towards the bureaucracy, our organization, even GDPU. You know, Patrick goes without a salary if we don't have enough money to do these projects. And our strategy for this, I think, is we've got 3 goals. The first is that we'll get the model right. I mean, eventually, you know, we'll stop kind of tinkering with it, and we'll have the entire package will be there, clear, and proven. Second is we want GDPU to take this over. I mean, our strategy as an organization at the Advocacy Project is to gradually withdraw so the local partner becomes self-sufficient. And the third is we have to get the district government to endorse this project and this approach. Because once the district government does it, it can change 50 schools. We can only work in one school a year at the moment. So those are the three goals. And I think we're on target. I mean, it's going to be difficult to get the district government to endorse this within the foreseeable future, because they don't get any money from Kampala, and that's a huge problem. But anyway, I think it's a wonderful project. We got funding from the church last year, which actually most of your money is going to go into that school. Your previous grant funded the Abacus School last year, which we did last summer. And so we're a year behind, if you like. So we actually have a good amount of your last year's donation that we can put into this current project, the Laputa school that you just saw. And we're able to do that because we're very stingy with our money and very careful with it. You know, we as I say, we've given quite a lot to our community partners from our own core funds, but I think we can make this happen. And as soon as this thing opens up in Uganda, which it will, I mean, eventually kids are going to have to go back to school, then we'll be on it like a shot. And it would be wonderful to think that you're with us. I hope you will be.
Ian, can I ask a question? We've got another partner that works in Kenya, and they've got a construction project going on where they're building a school that is continuing, even though the sponsor and the lady we work with is here in the US and is not able to travel back there, but she's found a way to continue that construction project. Do you believe that construction can take place in Uganda in the summer this year?
I really don't know, Jim. I think it's possible. If not the summer, then certainly the fall.
Yeah.
I mean, as soon as that school opens, then the construction can happen.
Okay.
And there's the same pressure on the government of Uganda and the district government to reopen, particularly schools. I mean, here in Rhode Island, we're having a huge debate about this, and I'm sure you are in Ohio as well. I think that the pressure to reopen schools will actually become irresistible in the fall. So my prediction is that yes, the schools will reopen. I mean, it may take another 1 or 2 months, but a lot of this, you know, these decisions that are taken in these countries, a lot of them hinge upon variables which are very difficult to predict. In the case of Nepal, for example, because the airlines have opened up, they're bringing back very large numbers of migrant workers from the Middle East, and they're very worried about that. And they're also worried about the fact they don't have a frontier, a border with India. So a lot of people are sort of moving across that border. In the case of Uganda, they're also worried about people returning. So when people return, they kind of put them into hotels in Kampala. There's always a concern about refugees. And you know, that border again with Sudan is pretty porous. So that may incline the local government in Gulu to be more cautious. But even if they are, I just cannot see them going without reopening the schools. And as soon as the schools reopen, we're back in business.
I believe this year it's going to be pretty fluid situation. There's already talk in this country on a second wave and all that sort of thing. Who knows what's going to happen? So I think that our responsibility is to stay on top of this and respond pretty quickly as we see the need. Could you, before we open up to other questions, could you talk about your funding needs this year beyond what you currently have?
I think at the moment that we have about 3,000. I think it's about $3,000 for that WASH program.
Mm-hmm.
And And most of that comes from the mission. So we will get that done. We will get that toilet installed as soon as it opens up. And even if we have to draw on our own money to do it, which I think we might very well do. We also have to find a salary for Patrick and his assistant and cover the cost of transport. And really, you know, that budget is as long as a piece of string. I mean, in an ideal world, what we would like to do is we would like to expand it, and we would like to come up with a budget, an annual budget of about 15,000, so that we can work in 2 schools instead of just 1, because the need is so great. But we can make do with 6, 7, you know, $7,500. We can get that job done, and we can make sure that GDPU, that its organizational needs are met. And, you know, as I say, if necessary, we'll draw on our own core funds to do it. It's become such a promising program that we can't afford any kind of slowing down, I don't think. That's basically the way I'm thinking at the moment.
In the last few minutes we have here, let's open it up to other questions that anybody has and or any thoughts. Then we've got additional part of the meeting. You're welcome to stay, but we need to get through some of the funding operations that we've got going on this year. The planning's underway at the current point. Martha, you want to go?
Yeah, I just want to, first, thanks to both of you. That was just fascinating and delightful. Wondered about just the political situation in Uganda itself. I know, Becca, you've talked about the national government being pretty sketchy, may be the word. How much does that filter down to local governments? Are local governments able to maintain enough, you know, integrity or whatever?
Autonomy.
Autonomy, thank you. Thanks, Becca.
I think it's all about local government, isn't it? I mean, that's one of the things we've learned here in the States. Local government is carrying the responsibilities. The Gulu government is quite impressive, actually. I mean, they are quite, you know, and the man who runs the education office is wonderful. I mean, he's really, really top rate. He's got AIDS. So he considers himself to be a person with disability. But he's a very close partner to this program, and he's the way for us to get into, you know, to turn this into systemic change. This is what we're shooting for. Just as in this country, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement is trying to change, you know, the way police are trained and equipment and all that kind of stuff, which we see happening. So over there, I think we're now, after 4 or 5 years of very successful projects, we're now thinking of changing the system. I mean, it's a little bit ambitious, but we do that through the local government, and they are a strong partner and also quite effective. I mean, I'm pretty impressed actually by the local Gulu government.
I think part of that stems from the history and relationship between Gulu in the north and Kampala in the south. There are all sorts of differences, and we can kind of go back to, you know, colonialism and how countries were created to begin with. But a lot of the power that's held in the in the south, the current president, Museveni, has been in power since 1986 and democratically elected for going on, you know, 30 plus years now. And so that relationship between the North and the South, during the conflict in the North, the civil war with the Lord's Resistance Army, the South was, like, the country's government was very absent in supporting that. And so with that, I think there was a lot of fodder in place to develop a strong local government. And so, I mean, absolutely, to Ian's point, I think there's a lot that can be done within the Gulu municipality, separate, without the national support.
Can I just make one more final point about money? What I'm hoping we can do this year is we can cover not just the cost of that school, which you saw in our movie, but also get something into the kitty for next year. It's very important to keep the momentum going. And, you know, what we don't want to do is suddenly come to a grinding halt at the end of this year where we have absolutely no money, with lots of uncertainty about how we raise more money next year as a result of this pandemic. So we are very stingy with our money, as I say, and we will err on err on the side of stinginess, I think, this summer. I mean, which means, you know, very, very little going into salaries, absolute basic minimum going into travel, and everything that we have will be invested in the school. So whatever, if we get any surplus, for want of a better term, it will get carried over to next year, which is kind of what happened last year. So I'm basically hoping very much, you know, that you can support us again, and we'll just be grateful for whatever you get, whatever we get. I mean, that would not have happened. I think the Abaca School, well, it definitely wouldn't have happened without your support. Last couple of years, the last two schools. And I'd like to go back with my camera, my invasive camera, and see how they're doing, you know, after they put the new schools in. That's one of my goals as soon as I can get out of my prison. Does anyone else have any kind of questions or ideas? Or
I'd just like to point out that I think I speak for the whole group. The Advocacy Project is a permanent resident on our partner list. I don't think that's going away anytime soon. So you can expect more from us as we get through our funding process here.
Well, that's really great news. I mean, they will be enormously encouraged by that, you know, we will show our gratitude in whatever way we can.
And just to let you know, we're going to move to part of the meeting now to talk about our plan. Obviously, unless we can move this whole sale to Rhode Island and do it there, we've decided that we're, you know, we aren't going to do the sale. We're not going to get people together. We're not going to collect stuff. But instead, instead of a rummage sale, we're just having a direct appeal to the members of our congregation and also to the community who's been involved in supporting this too. And the goals that were set for this are beyond what I, you know, imagine we could possibly do. Right. But you know, the leadership of the church is convinced that they can make this happen. We're talking to very specific people and families in the congregation, our heavy hitters, as we'd call them, you know, who can make substantial donations to this. And then we're going to talk to every member of the congregation about how, you know, the world doesn't stop just because of the pandemic. Yeah. The needs are still there, and in fact are even greater. And so we're anticipating a good solid response to this. And once we've done this throughout the month of August is when we'll finish everything up.
Right.
Then by September, we'll be able to tell you what kind of money we're able to work with. But I'm very optimistic, as I think most of the people here, if not all, about how we're going to be able to do this. And you know, Jim saying that you guys are kind of listed as a permanent partner. Our hope is that if the toilet project becomes self-sustaining, then you have an opportunity to sell the next project for us to support. Because I know you have several things going, and we'd prefer to continue with people that we know who've shown success and also show stinginess. That's a big deal. So we really appreciate that, and we hope that we'll have some really good news by the end of the summer.
Well, that's great. Well, stinginess means we have less clothes to offer up at our rummage sales, you see, in Rhode Island. Let me also just say, we have had some success with Rotary clubs for the first time ever. We've got a Rotary club here in Rhode Island to invest in this project, and the Rotary Club down in Gulu is very, very keen on it. So we're trying to encourage those partnerships between Rotary clubs here and the Rotary Club in Uganda. And if anyone has any contact at all with a Rotary Club, this is just tailor-made, because the appeal is coming from the Uganda Rotary Club. I mean, they understand the need to step up and fulfill their civic responsibilities. And they're really, really keen to build relationships with Rotary clubs in this country. So if anyone knows those contacts, if you'd like to open a door, I'd be more than happy, me or Becca, would be more than happy to make the pitch. And of course, you're more than welcome to use our little video just to kind of get people to understand how dire the need is.
Well, I think we're going to move on to the other parts of the meeting. One of the advantages that's happened because of the social distancing and the remoteness of everything is, I think we're evolving to a plan where our partners are engaging directly with us every month, if not every few weeks. So we've had some video sessions with people we support work in Kenya and also in Guatemala. And I think this model is going to take us in a new direction in terms of engagement, which is pretty exciting, actually. So
it really is. I mean, we can get Patrick from Uganda and our peace fellow Wilson, you know, to meet with you all via Zoom in the late summer when we have a clearer idea of the timing of this. Yeah. And wouldn't it be great to sort of live stream something from Uganda itself? That would be
absolutely. No
we can
reason
dream.
We have the technology.
Listen, I'm not going to take any more of your time. I'm going to love you all and leave you, and with a huge thanks to everyone, particularly the wonderful Rebecca, who's sort of really been an inspiration for this project. I do think it's become a signal project for us, a signature project for us, and it wouldn't have happened without you. And I'm more than happy to keep everyone informed in whatever way you want.
Great.
So thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Terrific. This worked wonderfully well. And in fact, I recorded the whole thing. So we.
Oh, you did. Well, I don't want to turn up on TMZ then or something like that. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Good to see everybody.
Thanks.